Look at Detroit in 1955. You see the Ford River Rouge plant running around the clock. You see 100,000 workers on a single shift. You see American steel being stamped into American cars. You see men who own their homes, raise their kids, and retire with dignity, all on a factory wage. Now look at that same plant today. You see a skeleton crew. You see parts shipped from China. You see a building that produces a shadow of what it once did. You are not imagining it. American manufacturing really did collapse. In 1979, the United States was the greatest manufacturing power on earth. Today, China makes more steel in 1 month than America makes in an entire year. This is not a story about automation. It is a story about surrender, engineered in corporate boardrooms, rubber stamped in Washington, and paid for by millions of workers who never got a vote. This is the forensic anatomy of the greatest industrial collapse in American history. In the decades after World War II, American industry stood alone at the summit of the world economy. The numbers are almost hard to believe now. Factories across the Midwest, in cities like Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Gary, poured out steel, glass, and machinery at a scale no other country could match. The Ford River Rouge complex in Dearborn, Michigan, sprawled over 1,000 acres and employed nearly 100,000 people on a single shift. Assembly lines ran day and night, turning raw iron ore and coal into finished cars, trucks, and engines. By the mid-1950s, the United States produced close to half of all manufactured goods on Earth. This was not just a statistic, it was a way of life. A factory wage in Warren, Ohio, or Rockford, Illinois could buy a house, put kids through college, and guarantee a secure retirement. Main streets thrived. Union halls were full. The promise was simple: if you were willing to work, you could build a life. This was the world that built the middle class. It was a world where the dignity of work meant more than a paycheck. It meant stability, pride, and the belief that each generation would do better than the last. If you want more honest investigations into what really happened to America, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The next documentary is already in production, and you will not want to miss it. On May 24, 2000, the House of Representatives voted 237 to 197 to grant China permanent normal trade relations. The Senate followed with a decisive 83 to 15 tally later that September. These votes were not routine. For decades, Congress had renewed China's trade privileges each year, using that leverage to press for human rights and fair labor standards. With the stroke of a pen, that leverage vanished. President Clinton signed the bill into law on October 10, 2000, declaring it a new ERA for American exporters, farmers, and entrepreneurs. The promise was simple: open access to a vast Chinese market would mean more jobs and prosperity at home. The reality was written into the fine print. Permanent status meant the annual review, Washington's last real tool to challenge Beijing, was gone for good. The law's conditions were tied to China's formal entry into the World Trade Organization. On December 11, 2001, China became the World Trade Organization's 143rd member. The accession protocol, a dense document running hundreds of pages, spelled out obligations for both sides. Tariffs would fall. Foreign companies could set up shop. Dispute settlement would run through Geneva, not Capitol Hill. But the legal certainty that American negotiators celebrated also handed corporations a blank check. With Congress sidelined, there would be no more public hearings, no more annual debates, no more threats to pull the plug if promises were broken. The door was now open, not just to trade, but to a one-way transfer of production, jobs, and know-how, engineered by policy, not by fate. The numbers behind America's industrial collapse are staggering, but the reality on the ground is measured in lives upended and communities hollowed out. Between 2000 and 2010, economists David Autor, David Dorn, and Gordon Hanson found that between 2 and 2.4 million manufacturing jobs vanished due to import competition from China. This wasn't a gradual erosion. It was a shock that hit hardest in places like High Point, North Carolina, where the closure of furniture plants left hundreds without work. In Warren, Ohio, a single war end notice in October 2005 signaled the end for 1,800 auto parts workers. In the span of a few years, factory floors that once buzzed with activity stood silent. Local tax bases shrank, union halls emptied, and the promise of stable, middle-class work slipped away. A labor economist describes it as a wound that never fully healed. One decision in Washington multiplied across thousands of towns, with consequences that still echo today. Boardroom decisions, not automation, set the next chapter in motion. Corporate filings from the early 2000s reveal a pattern hiding in plain sight. Joint venture agreements with Chinese firms often included clauses requiring the transfer of manufacturing know-how and proprietary technology. In Ford's 2001 10-K filing, executives cited anticipated cost savings of 22% per vehicle as they shifted stamping and chassis production to joint venture plants in China. General Electric's 2002 filings projected that within 5 years, 90% of its consumer electronics components would be sourced from Chinese partners. The incentive structure was clear. SEC proxy statements show executive bonuses tied directly to global cost reduction targets and the success of overseas projects. At Caterpillar and Boeing, CEO compensation packages included a percentage of revenue from joint venture output. These were not passive trends. They were deliberate choices, engineered through contracts and reinforced by performance metrics. The blueprints of American industry were handed over, not lost by accident, but traded for short-term gains and executive rewards. By the end of the 2000s, America's industrial collapse had created a new kind of risk, one that reached far beyond economics. Nearly 90% of the active pharmaceutical ingredients used in generic drugs were now sourced from China. The FDA's 2009 assessment warned that a disruption in Chinese supply could leave U.S. hospitals without critical antibiotics or blood pressure medications. National security analysts pointed to a more hidden threat. Rare earth elements, essential for everything from guided missiles to smartphones, were being mined and processed almost entirely in Inner Mongolia. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, China controlled the majority of global rare earth processing by 2010. A single policy decision in Beijing could choke off supply lines overnight. The Government Accountability Office's 2011 report called this dependence a strategic vulnerability, not just an economic inconvenience. In this new reality, the supply chain itself had become a weapon, one that left the United States exposed, not just in commerce, but in defense, health, and the basic functioning of modern life. Manufacturing jobs once offered more than a paycheck. They delivered a wage premium that lifted entire households. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, factory work paid nearly 20% more than the average private sector job as recently as the late 1990s. That premium is now half what it was, and the difference shows up in every corner of American life. When the textile mills in Greenville, South Carolina, shuttered after companies moved loom operations to Shanghai, 2,000 workers lost not just steady pay, but health insurance, pensions, and the promise of retirement security. The city's pension fund, once stable, now faces a funding gap that has grown to more than $150 million. For many, the replacement jobs are in warehouses or service work, often at wages 30% lower, with few or no benefits. The old manufacturing wage could support a mortgage, college tuition, and a sense of dignity. The new reality is a downgrade, with less security, fewer benefits, and little hope that the next generation will do better. Recent efforts to rebuild America's industrial base have arrived with a sense of urgency, but also a sharp reality check. The CHIPS Act, passed in 2022, promised $52 billion in funding to jumpstart domestic semiconductor manufacturing. Yet even the most advanced new plants are projected to create hundreds, not thousands of jobs, nowhere near the scale of employment once seen in cities like Detroit or Rockford. Policymakers have outlined a menu of remedies: tax credits for advanced manufacturing, stricter Buy American rules, supply chain transparency laws, and limits on executive bonuses tied to offshoring. The gap between the ambition of these policies and the scale of the loss remains stark. For every new factory, ribbon cutting, there are still communities waiting for the kind of stable, middle-class work that defined a generation. Whether these measures can restore what was lost or simply slow the decline remains an open question. This was not a story of automation, but a deliberate industrial self-destruction, engineered in boardrooms, ratified in Washington, and paid for by workers from Detroit to the Carolinas. Today, America depends on China for rare earths, basic medicine, and supply chains. The cost is ongoing, and the verdict remains unfinished.